Welcome back. Today in our Sunday Spotlight, we're spacing out. Dr. Jay White is joining us from the Talcott Mountain Science Center to talk about why this month is just a little bit longer. And we're also going to talk about April's solar eclipse, which in certain parts of the U.S. is really a big deal. Dr. White, welcome.
Thank you.
So let's start with the calendar, because this month, February's got 29 days. It's a leap year.
Yeah.
Explain the science behind that, because I think we're all kind of accustomed to doing it, but maybe people don't know why. Explain.
Okay. It's interesting because there's really not science behind it. It's because we have an imperfect timekeeping system. So if you think about it, the universe knows how to act. I mean, what it does is there are things that are turning and spinning and orbiting, and we use some of those motions to keep up with time. We use the rotation of the Earth to keep up with the length of a day, but it's imperfect. We use the revolution of the Earth around the sun to keep up with the passage of a year, but it's imperfect. So what happens every now and then is we have to do just a little bit of tweaking to our system to make that imperfection go away, or at least smaller. So that's what we find right now.
So I told you, I Googled it, and I said, you correct me if I get anything wrong. I'm the words guy, not the science guy. But it takes 365.24219 days.
That's right.
And so then if we keep doing just 365, we're going to get off kilter.
We get off kilter, and we get off kilter actually pretty fast. So what we're trying to do, and the reason that this was started centuries ago, was to try to keep the seasons in roughly the same place in the year for us to observe them. So what that means is, if we don't do that, if we just keep it with 365 days, every 4 years you've got the equivalent of an additional day not being accounted for. And eventually the seasons start to move through the year. So what we do now is every 4 years, we're going to add a quarter of a day. And that feels good. And you say, oh, goodness gracious, that has impact on birthdays and things like that. You know, there are those few that have 29 February birthdays and all, you know, we can talk about leapsters and things like that. But it turns out that's not the whole story, because the number that you gave was not 0.25. It was 0.24 with some other digits. It turns out that there are additional errors that come in that we have to eventually account for too. So that means that if you are in a year that's evenly divisible by 400, you're going to have a leap year. If you're in a year that's evenly divisible by 100, you're not going to have a leap year. So there's a lot of stuff that you have to keep up with. And then every now and then, the Institute of Bureaus and Standards in the United States will say, we have to add a second to the length of the year, because all those extra digits, their effects add up. So timekeeping is something that we humans do. The universe knows what it's doing, but our imperfect timekeeping systems, they have to be adjusted just a bit every now and then.
Well, I'll tell you what, next time I need the time, I'm going to call you, and you can tell me what it is, because that sounds that it's super interesting.
Yeah.
But all we got to know is there's 29 days on the calendar this month. That's 29. The practical advice.
That is. That's the practical advice. You know, I was curious because some states handle this in different ways for those that are born on the 29th of February. Some people say, oh, does that mean my aging is going to be different? You know, I'm only going to be aging 1 year for every 4 that all of you? It's like, no, it doesn't mean that at all. This morning, because I was curious, I called the Connecticut Department of Motor Vehicles. It's like, I'm curious how you actually handle those people that have birthdays on the 29th. And the woman kind of laughed, and she said, well, why? And I said, well, I'm just curious. And she said, I'm going to have to talk to my supervisor. And they both came back, and they both said, well, we handle it as if it's the 28th of February. It's like, oh, that's interesting. So again, different states handle it in different ways, but it's something that we all do have to accommodate for.
And now we know.
Yeah.
Tell us about the eclipse. This is a big deal, particularly in the areas of totality.
Oh, this is exciting.
When's it happening?
It really is. So the 8th of April in this year is going to be a dramatic event for the bulk of the country. Roughly 35 million people across the central part of the United States are going to be in what we refer to as the path of totality. It's really interesting because what we're doing is we're celebrating the absence of something, which means that at that time, the sun is going to go away because the moon's shadow will pass over that swath of North America. People in that path are going to experience a second twilight, a second, essentially, sort of sundown, and then the sky will darken. For us here in Connecticut, we're not in the path of totality, but things are going to change for us in a pretty dramatic way.
What are we going to see? So if you don't, there's hotels and campgrounds in that path of totality have been sold out for years.
Yes.
But if you're not in that path, what will you see?
Okay, for us here in the mid part of Connecticut, we're still going to have a dramatic effect because actually a little bit more than 90% of the sun's face is going to be covered. And you say, well, the sun is still bright, and it will be bright. Not the kind of thing that you can look at with the naked eye, but yet, if you're outside, you're going to notice that it feels kind of like a twilight. The birds are going to be behaving a little bit differently. The air will cool just a little bit, although we'll still be in sort of the cold of Connecticut spring. But you're going to be able to see changes in light. And if you come and join us on Talcott Mountain, because we're going to have a solar eclipse festival, through solar eclipse viewers, you're going to be able to see those bites that are taken out of the sun as the eclipse develops. We want to take advantage of this, and we hope that it's going to be a clear day, because the next time that we're going to have such a deep partial eclipse is 54 years. And the next time that we here are going to have that path of totality pass over us is 2079, so 55 years. So some of us are not going to be around to see that, so we want to take advantage of this one right now.
We only have a few seconds left, but people can go on the website and find out more about the Solar Eclipse Festival.
Certainly can. They certainly can. We're going to have activities for children, and we're going to be having timing so that we can keep everybody abreast with what's going on. So invite everybody up to the mountain. We're going to have places for people to park, and we'll have shuttle services running.
Well, we heard in the Path of Totality, hotels have been sold out for years. So go to the Talcott Mountain Science Center and find out more.
Yes, sounds great.
All right, Dr. Jay White, thank you for being with us here on CT24.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
That is CT24 for this week. CBS Sunday Morning, of course, is coming up next. Have a great rest of your weekend. We will, of course, meet you back here in Studio A next Sunday morning.
Eclipse trips all over the world.